Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about should women study theology, and if they should, how does that parse out, right? What does that look like? So I'm just going to be discussing part of this video from Mike Winger, his most recent video that came out in his Women in Ministry series. That's kind of like a quick run through of what women can and can't do in the church and all of this, but it's actually really good, makes a lot of sense, and if you want more detailed information of how he got to these conclusions, you can always go to his entire series. So I'll put the link below for the playlist. Okay, so let's start let's start by hearing what he has to say about if women should study theology.
And about how one of them was doing the housework and not just housework, but doing the host.
Oh, I went a little bit too far. Let me go back a little bit.
Would apply there. Let's ask a question about women theologians, though. Back to easy questions. Women theologians. This is not only easy to answer in that it's permissible, but I think it's actually a good thing, a wonderful thing. A woman who says, I want to be a theologian, it's not something that you should feel weird about or embarrassed about. I don't think there's any reason for that. 1 Timothy 2:11.
So if you want to, yes, you can. But I guess there's stipulations, there's rules for it, and he's going to go into detail there.
Same passage that forbids, right? I don't permit a woman to teach or exercise authority, says, let a woman learn. Right now, there's a way of doing the learning, but learning, right, quietly and with all submissiveness is simply affirming all. If I've gone all through all this in the video before, so this is not like women can't make noise and they have to be like the dog with their tail tucked between their legs at all times. Like that's not what's meant by quiet and submissive. But the idea of let a woman learn.
I mean, think about it. In what context would you not be quiet and submissive anyways? If you're sitting in a school classroom or a college classroom, or if you're sitting in church on Sunday, well, why would you not sit and learn in quietness? I mean, that's not an oppressive statement. It's not oppressive to say that. Because, I mean, would you be disruptive in a class and not be quiet? I mean, of course not. You would sit down, you would listen to the teacher and be quiet and learn. There's nothing oppressive about that inherently.
That is in a command form in that text. Limiting a woman's theological education, learning, is specifically critiqued in Scripture in multiple places, actually. So it's not only here, but when Jesus was doing his ministry, he had women disciples who traveled with him and continually learned and were educated by him. This was very uncommon at the time. Rabbis didn't do this, you know. Now, this doesn't mean that they bunked with the men. Obviously, they were very gender segregated culture in some ways that are very positive, actually.
If it was okay with Jesus, it's okay with me. Just saying.
Some ways that are probably not, but in many ways that probably are good. We can remember them today. I remember when, was it Mike Pence said he had a rule about not riding alone in a car with a woman other than his wife or family or something like that, and people just lost their minds, like this was the most oppressive, horrible thing ever. And it was just,
I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. I mean, it keeps you out of trouble. It does. I mean, I don't think I would just be riding in a car with a man randomly, by myself or whatever. I mean, yeah, it's not a bad thing, especially since he was a person of influence. And, people are always out to get those kind of people.
weird because like I heard it and thought, it seems like like okay rule to me. That this is not oppression. If you interpret that as oppression, there's something you're misunderstanding about acknowledging differences between men and women and all those issues of temptation and affairs and things like that. Anyhow, let a woman learn, 1 Timothy 2:11, or women disciples of Jesus. We could even read the specific example, probably one of my favorites, which is Luke 10:38. I've gone over this, but I'll briefly mention it. Mary and Martha, right? Their whole experience back and forth, and about how one of them was doing the housework and not just housework, but doing the hosting of a group of people. And the other one was just sitting at the feet of Jesus, getting discipled and learning. And when you see the rabbinic context of this, it feels even more powerful. So I'll explain that briefly. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village. This is Luke 10:38. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. That phrase, sat at the Lord's feet, N.T. Wright says it means she was officially being trained to be a rabbi. I think that's a broad overreach, but it does mean that she was officially sitting at a rabbi's feet to be discipled by him. She wasn't just located there.
So she was learning. She was learning theology. She was learning from Jesus. She was sitting at his feet. She was learning.
At his feet, like physically sitting right at his feet. You have to picture them in a room 3 inches from each other. No, she was in an official, I'm a learner of this rabbi position. She was a disciple. That's the rabbinic context. It's interesting. And listen to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. She was what? Distracted with much serving. Because guess what's more important than being the best host in the world? I don't know. Learning theology?
Hey, I didn't say it. He said it. Learning theology is for women. You don't have to just do devotional Bible studies and self-help books in your women's group. You know, it says here that women can learn theology. It says women can be theologians. So
she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. So this is so interesting because you've got this what would I call it? The interface of a woman learning theology and being discipled versus a woman who's hosting and taking care of the sort of tasks that you would normally associate traditionally with womanhood.
And that's interesting if you really think about it, because that's probably what most people would think that we should be doing, is just doing this caretaker thing and just, serving and doing that kind of stuff. But Jesus actually refutes that and says, no, actually, this is more important.
And what did Jesus say? But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.
So he corrects her, and he's like, no, actually, sitting and learning about me is more important than serving and being a host, So that's pretty powerful if you think about it.
I'm going to tell her to stop learning and stop sitting at my feet. I'm not going to... That is a principle we can draw from the things we're learning in Scripture here. Do not limit the theological education of women. There's a topic, a theological study.
That's interesting, because I know a lot of people would think that we probably need to be limited in that aspect, and that we don't need to learn theology or, how to do apologetics or how to break down Bible passages or anything like that. So yeah, that's it's kind of interesting if you think about it. That's not what Jesus. It's not what Jesus taught, and that's not how he treated women.
Women theologians, no brainer. This is a beautiful thing. What about a woman being in seminary classes? Again, I'll skip over to what could be a little bit of a harder question. The reason why people debate whether women should be in seminary classes is because some seminaries are specifically designed to train pastors. Like, that's their whole agenda. We just want to train pastors. And I think that this can be an open question. If I have a group, like say, when I went to the School of Ministry at Calvary Costa Mesa, that is a small group of men. We had like 20 guys in our class, and they go in and they're literally just being trained for pastoral ministry. We have classes and discussions about what it's like to lead a church and things like that. To say only men can be part of that group is not to limit their theological education. Now, in a sense, you're like, hey, you can't be part of our theology class that we're doing here, the apologetics class we have in this group. But the cohort is meant to teach and train up pastors only. I think that's fair. But if you have a broader seminary where you're like, hey, only 12% of our students even move into full-time ministry or become pastors, then you got to really ask yourself if a limit like that makes any sense. You seem to be allowing lots of people that aren't pursuing pastoral ministry, and they won't, and you don't care that they won't, and you let them in your program. So I don't know why you would forbid women in that case. My 2 cents on that. Others can work through that and think about it on their own.
Yeah, so it's not that we can't take seminary classes. I think he's saying it just depends what your goal in mind is after that. Like, are you doing it to become an elder, a pastor in the church, or are you doing it to do some other kind of ministry? So I think it just depends what you're going for.
You could even just say certain classes. Maybe the seminary broadly embraces men and women coming, but there's certain classes like, dude, this is literally just pastor training. There's no reason to bring women in there except that we're sort of complicitly encouraging stepping into roles that we think are not biblical. And so I can understand limits there, and they seem quite reasonable. But you don't want to limit the theological education of women in any way that you can avoid. So what about a woman theologian who, again, this is a bit of a more tough question, but I'm going to ask it right now because I'm on topic with women theologians. A woman theologian who writes a book about theology that men read.
So it's like, how does that work? Can a woman write a book that maybe men and women will read? He's going to kind of go through what he thinks about this.
Okay. Now there's an intersection of a woman teaching theology to men. Perhaps this is an easy question. It seems to me easy, okay? It doesn't seem easy to a lot of other people, and I'm not laughing at that. I'm actually trying to think, how do I make sure I answer your dilemmas in my response here? But I think that you can use Priscilla as at least part of an example of this question. It was an unofficial teaching moment, but it was also simply a non-elder teaching moment.
Oh yeah, this is good. This is really good what he says here about Priscilla and Aquila. And I've heard some people say that, oh, she was only teaching, under her husband. But listen to what he says about that.
Priscilla in Acts 18:26. Her name is listed first. She definitely teaches Apollos here. Acts 18:26. Priscilla and Aquila heard him. Heard Apollos. He was teaching things. He was incomplete. So they took him aside and explained the way of God more accurately. Probably the word Priscilla is before Aquila here, because either she's more well known to the writer, more well known to the audience, or possibly because she was perhaps more prominent in the discussion, that she actually did more of the talking than Aquila. But at any rate, you can't discount her as just sort of heard Apollos. He was teaching things. He was incomplete. So they took him aside and explained the way of God more accurately. Probably the word Priscilla is before Aquila here, because either she's more well known to the writer, more well known to the audience, or possibly because she was perhaps more prominent in the discussion, that she actually did more of the talking than Aquila. But at any rate, you can't discount her as just sort of standing to the side and going, what else are you going to say? She was actively teaching. Explain to him.
So, yeah, to those of you who want to say, oh, well, it was her and her husband, and, she didn't really do much teaching. It doesn't really count as her correcting a man or teaching a man theology. No, that's not what it says here. So let's see what else he says about
God more
that.
accurately. And this is lifted up as a positive example, I think, in Scripture. She shows that women can correct a man's theology outside the function of elder. That's what I think the principle we learned from Priscilla is. Remember how I said examples help us to not extend application too far and make the mistake the Pharisees did, where they forbid so many things on the Sabbath that what was meant to be a blessing became a burden on God's people. I think the gender differences are meant to be a blessing. We extend them too far, they become a burden. We remove them entirely, and it becomes a plague. In another way, it damages families, it damages marriage, and hurts the culture. And we see this happening right now. Do I even have to make a case? Authors are not like elders. That's my main point. I would suggest the only thing an author, female author who's writing theology, needs to consider is, don't write your book in a way that mimics the elder role in a person's life.
And if you want to know what the elder role is, you just have to go back in his video, looks like to 2 hours and 30 minutes. He explains it and he breaks it all down and stuff like that. So if you're like, oh, how do I know if I'm doing that? He explains it here.
Now there's lots of nuanced ways you can do that, but there's got to be, basically you could write a book where you're simply taking authority over the reader, and you're claiming authority over their lives, and there's a way in which you can teach that doesn't do that. You're not in a church, you're not proclaiming things as a book, you're not proclaiming with the backing of a church in an official position representing, you're not doing something at the church gathering on Sunday mornings. You're just touching the topics of theology which you're encouraged to study in Scripture. So I think that it's fine. A writer doing theology and a man reads it and he learns and grows from it is a positive thing. I've learned and grown from female commentators. One of the most challenging studies I did in the Gospel of Mark one of the most. It wasn't the most by a long shot, really, but it was in the top 10 of the hard studies I did in the Gospel of Mark, and it was this study about the name it and claim it stuff that we see from what's his name, Kenneth Copeland, and those guys, and does that. How fairly are they interpreting the words of Jesus about asking what you want in his name? It was a woman theologian who wrote about these issues in the Gospel of Mark that I thought had the best handling of the subject. And I shared it and even held up her book and said, here, she wrote this book, and shared it with others that they could check it out on their own if they wanted. I don't think this is like her becoming your elder. Let me put it this way. When you read a book, are they becoming like an elder to you? Probably not, right? Like if that happens to you, maybe you shouldn't read too many books because maybe you're a little too easily, just being honest with you, you're a little too easily influenced by others and not processing stuff fully on your own. So you got to maybe have less sources that are really, really trustworthy.
Yeah, I think this is a good point, and I think this takes a lot of stress off of women in ministry roles. I'm sure a lot of us feel like, oh well, we're women, we're not allowed to, do anything. We're not allowed to teach. We're not allowed to do this or that. But this is a nice breakdown that he's giving that really shows you, like, yeah, you can teach theology, you can learn theology, you can write a book. He even talks about, can you do a YouTube channel? He says yes, as long as you're as long as you're not putting yourself in that role of elder. So it's good. I think it's really good what he's saying here. And I think he really explains it well and gives us a lot of opportunities in that aspect. And so we don't have to feel guilty about it.
Just for your own sake, like that's just
women.
Wisdom. But why would we limit the authors? We should limit the readers in that case. Say, hey, maybe you have a problem reading this book, fine. Others don't. I don't want to make a rule. Writing as Christians, helping other Christians, not a problem. Just don't write in a way that mimics the elder role. What about a woman running a podcast or YouTube channel?
Oh yeah,
I have friends and women I know who I love their ministries, their online ministries. And you might say I'm biased, but hey, I'm not asking you to make a decision based on that I love their ministries. I'm asking you to make a decision based upon what I'm about to tell you. So a woman running a podcast or YouTube channel, and they teach theology and they talk about theology and they address issues that are related to Christianity specifically. I think that if it's directed towards women, how could anyone argue against that? Right?
So no question, if you're running a YouTube channel or a ministry that's directed just toward women, he said, don't even worry about it. You're good. You're good to go, right?
That's a no-brainer, right? You will ask if it could be directed to men in a second, but let's say it's directed towards women. Obviously, nobody could argue against that. You have a ministry that's focused on ministering to women and teaching them theology and that kind of thing. I don't see that as being inherently any kind of problem. I will say this. Just don't turn it into a little kingdom that is in competition with the local church. This is not an issue with that ministry existing. It's an issue that happens frequently in parachurch ministries or in secondary ministries within a church where there's like a gathering here and this person gets a big ego and they start sort of getting more and more commanding of people and they get, their head gets big and they start building a little kingdom within the church or a kingdom within their podcast or a kingdom where they're like, I'm the one, you got to listen to everything I say and do everything I say. They affect.
Yeah, see, I think that totally makes sense. I mean, I don't know anybody who's trying to do that. I don't know. I mean, maybe there are women who are trying to do that, but I mean, I'm definitely not. I don't want to even deal with that, nor do I have time with a full-time job or ready to do that. But I think that this is great because we have lots of women with teaching gifts that can run podcasts or YouTube channels, and they're not trying to be all encompassing or anything like that. They just kind of want to teach the word and spread the gospel and do stuff like that. That's what I want to do. And I want to help people not go astray into wrong religions and wrong thinkings and all these kind of things. And it's funny because somebody said in the comments a few days ago that I shouldn't be even teaching because women can't teach or speak in the church or anything like that. And I'm like, well, this is a public forum. It's YouTube. This is not the church. So according to Mike Winger, it's all good.
Like a elder in that ministry, even though that ministry is not, like, it's a YouTube channel. In this case, it's just a YouTube channel where you're teaching specifically towards women. Just don't turn it into like a role that's meant to challenge or usurp another position in the church that is there and specifically for men. Let's say that you have a YouTube channel and you teach in podcast or whatever, and you're doing theology, and it's to men and women, and you know that men are listening and women are listening, and you're cool with that, and you've marketed it in a way that was meant to reach to both sexes. My advice here, and many would have this more challenging. My advice here would simply be, don't slip into the elder role. This has to do with the nuance and the way in which you communicate. You'll have all sorts of little decisions you make here and there that are you saying, hey, this is just me backing off an elder type role, making sure I do this in a way that honors the Lord. Just keep that position of pastor, that mantle of pastor kind of off of you. But the alternative to this, I think, is...
Oh, this is a good point that he's about to make. This is a really, really good point. And this is like my favorite
not
part.
Good. Because imagine saying this. You can't be neutral here. If you're going to answer the question, you got to answer it somehow. Imagine saying that a woman can't write books, especially the books that men might read, can't do Christian podcasts or YouTube channels or religious Instagram pages or all of the other sort of media things that are so easy to do nowadays. And you're going to say they can't do those things. Those can only be done by men, or even worse, only be done by elders, which of course takes elders away from a lot of the tasks that they're doing in the church, because now you have them doing all the other stuff. These are public forums. YouTube, podcast, books, all these things are public forums. And it seems artificial to restrict Christian discussions in public forums because of a restriction on the role and function of an elder in a church. We see women teaching and having authority in various ways in Scripture. That is not a problem. We just see it here in the church as being an issue. I'm not worried here about women running these podcasts as a general rule. There's going to be some that do it wrongly. There's going to be some that are oppressive and are usurping and things like that, whatever. But
Yeah, and like that's totally understandable. Like I said, nobody that I know is trying to do that. So it shouldn't be an issue. Really, it's a public forum. That'd be like telling women that they can't go out and preach the gospel. I mean, the Great Commission was given to all of us. So, just because we're doing it online, it doesn't mean that that's any different. Like he said, as long as you're not trying to usurp authority, over the church or like whatever, like he said, that it's totally
worried
fine.
about that. I'm more worried about weak women because
Oh yes. This is like everything here that he says, and this is so true. I'll tell you what I think about this.
If you tell women, check that off, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, and then you're basically saying, we want to strip you of being part of public discourse, of being able to have this sort of wide impact in people's lives. We're worried about women having influence, not just pastor influence, elder influence in the local church, but influence in general. I don't think that should be our main concern. Influence shouldn't be the problem. That is my opinion. I do think it's true. I think that it harmonizes various scriptures, both the clear teachings and the examples that we see. Does that mean that a woman should make her podcast her identity, her theological work her identity? No, she really shouldn't. That would seem unhealthy. And to turn that into like career and self-achievement as like my main goal and stuff, that seems to be problematic, right? Like that family, marriage, if assuming you're married, would seem to be a much higher priority than those things. So I don't want to create a group of theologically weak women, though. I've seen this before, women's ministries who feel like,
oh my gosh, yes, this part.
okay, we'll have only men teachers when we really have teaching, and then when a woman teaches in our women's ministry, it will always be not theological topics.
Oh my gosh, I have such a problem with this. Oh my goodness. I swear every single church that I've gone to, I'm like, oh yay, there's a women's Bible study. And then I join the women's Bible study, and it's just a bunch of fluff and stuff, self-help book nonsense. And I'm like, why? Like, why aren't we learning the Bible? And then you've got the men over here, they're learning really good, deep theological things, but the women are just learning about, how to be a good wife, and not that that's not important. Of course, that's important, but or just let's get past our traumas, and like, okay, like that's cool too. Like some people, sometimes we need that. I mean, and that definitely has its place. But like when I have a women's Bible study, I want to learn the Bible. I don't want to just read a book that some woman wrote, and that you're just trying to get past your emotional issues and like stuff like that. Like there's definitely a place for that. But I mean, why aren't we learning theology in women's Bible studies? And what he's about to say totally makes sense of why we're not. It's because they don't think women need to learn theology and that women don't need to teach, and they've taken it to this extreme where they think that women don't need to know these things because they're never going to teach and they're not allowed to. So this is what he says it creates. He says it creates weak women.
I've seen up and close women's ministries where that was the rule. Women can do testimonies, but they can't teach the Bible really. Maybe reference a verse, but you can't do like Bible teaching and theology, that kind of stuff. And it just kind of made the women in the ministry, in the church, kind of weak, theologically speaking. And sort of they had to constantly just do these like devotional things that were just so thin. And most of the women who were most serious about Christ just felt like the women's ministry was bleh, And
Yes. Yes, yes, and yes. Yes to all of the above. I feel this way. I really do. And I just can't. This is why I'm doing a YouTube channel, Women for Theology, because we need to know. We need to know. Us women need to know. And there's not enough of this for us, especially not from our churches. They just think that we don't need to know any of this stuff. And it's offensive, honestly. It really is. And it's not fair for women to be weak spiritually. It's just
right. And I think it was a result of overly restricting the functions of women in the church.
not. 100%. 100%. I'm so glad he made this video. I totally feel this way. And I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why do they always do this to us? Why do they always have these, nonsense women's groups? And, I'm sure it helps a lot of people. But like for me, it's just not it's just not, I don't need any more of that. Like I can go buy a self-help book and learn that stuff. I can go, I can go and figure all that stuff. I can go to a therapist and figure out how to heal emotionally. I can go to a psychologist or something, or heal from my traumas, and it's cool. Like get support groups and stuff like that. But like I want some real theology. I want some real Bible learning. Like I want to learn Greek and Hebrew, and I want to know these things, and teach me some of that stuff. Teach me some hermeneutics, and teach me some biblical Hebrew and cultural context, and like give me some good stuff. Give me something good. I don't need just this devotional stuff. I need more. I need more.
My point here is there's a cost if you have too many restrictions. There's a consequence. It's not just being safe. No matter where you draw that line, it's going to have consequences. So I want to be cautious. And I'd rather draw it closer to the mountain than further back, personally. So let's talk about women prophesying.
Okay, yeah. So that's as far as I'm going to go. This is a 4-hour video, so I just wanted to go through those parts, and just so good. And this is really helpful, and I really like what he says, and I hope it helps you, women, to kind of know your role and to know what you can do and what you can't do. You can go back and watch his whole thing. I watched the whole thing. I really did. I listened to it all day. I listen to stuff all day while I'm working on YouTube. I have certain people I like to listen to and stuff like that. I like Mike Winger. There's a few others that I like to listen to. So, but yeah, I really, this was really helpful. And he's got a whole, like I said, he's got a whole thing. He's got a whole series on women in ministry. But this video is really nice because he applies it practically to everyday life. So you kind of know, okay, in this case, this is okay, in that case, it's not, or this is when it's gone a little too far, and so on and so on. So, anyway, so if you're a woman and you've been trying to figure out, am I allowed to learn theology? Should I learn theology? Am I allowed to teach? Can I ever teach men? Can I write a book? Can I do any of these things? I hope this is helpful for you, because it's definitely helpful for me, even though I already felt like I kind of had that answer. But it's always nice to have that validation from somebody who studies the scholars and studies the scriptures, and somebody who really goes deep into the word. So yeah, and for anybody who disagrees, you are free to disagree with anything he says or anything I say. You don't have to agree or watch any of it, but so it's all good. But for those of you who wanted to know, here it is for you. So I hope you learned something, and this kind of helps you figure things out and parse things out. And like I said, for anybody who disagrees, like, that's cool. Like, you don't really have to agree with it. So, all right then. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope this helped you, and we'll see you next time.